Hi, my name is Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss why it was that pro-EU debate never ran counter to the Eurosceptic arguments in the UK, leading to a very uncoordinated fight back when it mattered. But first, if you'd like to receive notifications of daily news and political commentary, then please click the subscribe button and the bell notification icon. So, what I'm talking about here is not so much the public debate over the last few years, which has certainly been notable for being one-sided. The pro-Brexit argument was coordinated and rehearsed, but the pro-EU argument was much less effective, even though the numbers in favour of remaining soon swung back into the majority after the referendum. And I don't mean on the part of politicians who were fearing that speaking out publicly against Brexit might hurt their careers when their leaders were speaking in favour of it, though that certainly didn't help. But the pro-Brexit cause had their superstars outside of Parliament, household names that were never out of the news. In contrast, the Remain side had nobody. Try and think about it. Who could you name in terms of the pro-Remain side? Only if you're very much involved in it could you even name a few, and you know they're not household names. Some emerged, like Stephen Bray, Gina Miller, but they had a lot of catch-up to do over their rivals, and they, again, have much more limited exposure in the public mind over the ones who have been building up their brand for years, such as, for example, Nigel Farage. But I'm not talking about the recent debates, but why there wasn't a debate at all for years beforehand. So from the Conservatives' point of view, who had always had pro-EU leaderships before the referendum, always, the problem was that their policies in government were invariably damaging for a lot of people. People's lives became worse, the gap between the rich and poor consistently increased, wage growth was stagnant for decades, and the health service was getting noticeably weaker, as were schools. They were falling into disrepair. Of course, the Conservative government couldn't let people think that it was their policies blighting their lives, so they needed to blame someone else. Now, blaming the opposition only gets you so far, particularly when you are in government for years and years and years. So the easy way out was to blame the EU and its predecessors, which worked out quite well for them. Our governments were working closely with the EU, very closely, very productively, where the general public never paid any attention. We never really paid attention to what was going on in the EU Council, the EU Commission, the EU Parliament. And it drove a lot of the reforms that resulted in the modern EU. And for all the talk of the EU imposing laws on us, the UK either pushed for or voted in favour of the vast majority of them, about 98% of them. In fact, I'm yet to find a single Brexit supporter who can name a single EU law that is making their life worse. But there was no danger of the population at large turning on the EU, so it was seen as a safe strategy. Now, from Labour's point of view, who also didn't really help, they were initially opposed to membership when it first started out, when we first joined, but then became much more pro-EU once it became the EU and became more than just a capitalist project, more about a coordinated way of delivering social and climate change reform. Many socialist policies are now on the UK statute books because of EU legislation, not UK alone. Legislation that is going to disappear if Boris Johnson continues to get his way. So because Labour referred to the EU in terms of an economic argument and failed to focus on social reforms, we ended up mirroring the right wing's arguments in favour of the EU, that it was important for our economy, which it was, but that ended up being the only argument in favour of membership. And the problem is that most people don't understand economics. We know that we are going to hurt our economy. We've already hurt our economy. Most people refuse to believe it because fundamentally most people do not understand it. Of course not. Why would people understand it? It's complex, highly specialised, and the vast majority of people don't need to understand it. Most people in this country are wage earners. Economics is for other people to deal with. What is a knowledge of economics going to do for a wage earner? But people who would have, been in favour would have understood the social argument. The social argument is easy to understand. You can understand the benefit of having paid holidays, guaranteed paid holidays. You can understand the importance of having guaranteed breaks in the working day. the need for foreign investment to secure jobs. You understand that you work for a company that's actually a foreign company, and actually it's good that these foreign companies want to build factories and so on in the UK. It secures jobs. They understand consumer protections, because all of these things feed into their daily lives. And you can say to people, well, imagine if you didn't have these. Oh, I wouldn't like that. That's an easy argument to understand. But it was never really pointed out that any of these things were EU legislation that were to do with EU membership. The pro-EU arguments were all about what politicians care about, which is GDP, as if anyone understands or gives a crap about that. In addition, the British media were largely anti-Europe, and the major political parties, particularly those who have to be very active in England, didn't like to take on the media if they could avoid it. And they thought they could avoid it by talking tough on Europe in sound bites for the papers, and then being quite happy to work closely with our European partners away from the public glare. The Eurosceptic movement was a rabble, constantly fighting amongst themselves as to what they wanted. There was no coordinated message emerging for the public to latch onto. But then they agreed to work together. They couldn't agree on what they wanted for a post-EU Britain, but they could agree that they wanted to leave the EU for various different reasons. So they stopped talking about their plans for after exit and focused on just the message of exit. Exit was all there was to it. Never mind what happens after. A well-organised campaign of misinformation began that was then echoed by different groups, from the Eurosceptic wing of the Conservative Party to the media barons to UKIP under Nigel Farage. They were all starting to present the same message. They pushed that message of fear and stopped talking about what they wanted of a post-Brexit Britain. That is why, to this day, nobody, even now the very Eurosceptic government we have, has published a roadmap for a post-Brexit Britain. Even now, when we're supposed to be on that path, nobody has published what it should look like, never mind what it will look like. And in the absence of a coordinated debate in favour of EU membership, beyond the economic benefits that people don't intuitively appreciate because they don't see the link with their own lives, the anti-EU message started to hit home. Your lives are bad because of immigrants, they said. Your lives are bad because of EU rules, they said. The EU tells us what we have to do. All lies, but not lies that anyone was disproven in public, and the media were amplifying the lies. I mean, a lot of these arguments are actually very, very simple. If you're going to believe that EU rules make your life worse, then name an EU rule that makes your life worse. It's that simple. Just ask that question of people. They can't say, because it doesn't exist. But no one was challenging people to think about that. By the time Brexit became a serious prospect, the Eurosceptics had their celebrities constantly in the news. The Europhiles did not. Who were our champions? We didn't have any. We had to rely upon our political leaders, neither of whom helped. David Cameron was so hated amongst the working classes that many have said that they voted for Brexit just to piss off Cameron, who was arguing, of course, that we stay. It was a protest vote for many. And as for Jeremy Corbyn, he'd spent decades arguing against the EU and the EEC, and now we were supposed to believe his arguments to remain, which were offered in very weak speeches. And, well, during the referendum campaign, he actually disappeared on holiday for 2 weeks. And in addition, although he pretended to speak in favour of remaining and convinced a lot of people, oh yeah, he did speak out in favour of remain, he was writing anti-EU articles. His quotes were being used by the Leave campaigns. And where were our non-parliamentary celebrities? The ones who resonated with the public? The ones who were popular amongst the public? We didn't have any. They weren't there. So a combination of our governments wishing to abdicate responsibility for their policies and fear of the anti-EU media have contributed to the fact that there was no effective debate taking place to counter the anti-EU message. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.